In the previous video, we added two custom outputs to our passenger detail component. We added edit and remove. In this video, we're going to look at how we're actually going to remove and edit them. So removing is the simplest one. At the beginning of this course, in the TypeScript refresher videos, we looked at this.groceries and we used a filter method to essentially use an immutable collection. So when we want to remove this particular item, what we want to do is do this.passengers. So we're going to reference this initial array of passengers and then equals this.passengers. And this time we're going to use the filter method. Now it's going to expect an individual passenger of type passenger. So let me just hide the sidebar so we can see this clearly. And we're also going to use an arrow function in here. Now the filter method will return a new array with items that pass our particular test. So the event that we're getting back is in fact one of these objects, depending on which one that we click. So for instance, if we clicked on this one, it has a unique ID of 3. If we have this one, it's 4 and 5. So typically our objects from a database of some kind will have a unique ID attached to them. So what we can do here is simply return, and we can just check that passenger.id. So the passenger is being passed in here, and we're going to check that that ID is not equal to the event ID. So all this is doing is simply checking this event passed back in here does not equal the passenger in here. Now this is actually a passenger, so what we could do is just add a passenger type here to say that this is going to be a passenger that's being passed through. So we can obviously then check this safely with TypeScript. So let's go ahead and go back to the browser and check this out. So let's go ahead and click on rows. So when we click remove, you can see that she has been removed. Now there's also one thing to note, that this has now updated. So we've got 3 out of 4 passengers that are total checked in. If I click remove again, we have 2 out of 3. Remove, remove, remove. We have no passengers in our collection. So this is telling Angular that we're using an immutable collection and we're passing new data down into different components, much like we saw in the conceptual video at the beginning of this chapter. When it comes to editing a passenger, things get a little bit more complicated because we have to look at the individual objects and then merge a change in as well. So here what we can do is this.passengers equals this.passengers. And instead of using filter, what we're going to do is use map. Now map will actually return a new collection as well. So we're also going to get the individual passenger of type passenger. And inside our arrow function, we can go ahead and start to create this logic. So inside of here, what we want to do is return each individual passenger. However, beforehand, we need to check if the passenger has been updated and merged those changes into the new passenger. So the way that we can do this is we can check the passenger ID again. So we can do if passenger ID equals the event ID. Now we can detect whether this particular passenger has been edited or not, much like we did with this filter method. So this is doing a comparison against each passenger. At the same time, we've also typed this, so we can also do this on this event here. So we're expecting our event to be an object of a passenger type. We're looping through our passengers array, and then we're getting each individual passenger. So if in fact the passenger has changed, what we can do is just override some of the properties. So we're actually going to create a new object here. So we're going to use object, and we're going to use object assign. Then we're going to assign the passenger, and then we're going to assign the event as the third argument. So what does this actually do? It simply detects whether we are in the current passenger that has been fired from the edit event. If so, we're going to use an immutable operation. This essentially takes that original passenger object and merges the latest changes of the event in. So you can assume that we have a name property of A as the original passenger, and maybe the change is then B. What it will essentially do is merge those changes into that new object. So that's all object assign is doing, is merging all of those changes across. Now we can't actually check these changes out in the browser. However, what we can do is a console log this.passengers. and we can't actually check this out because our components in the browser are locally updating the names. So here we're just going to do a console log passengers, and what we can do is expand this in the DevTools just to see that that passenger has in fact been updated. So for ease, I am going to update Stephen. So I'm going to click edit. We can type Todd motto and we're going to click done. So now we get 5 objects back in our array, and we look at the first one and you can see here that the full name has been updated to Todd motto. So our immutable collection has now created these new objects and our changes have been reflected in the parent. So in this video, you have learned how to pass changes from a child component up to a parent component. So we have 2 child components. One accepts an input of data. It simply just displays things. So this is purely stateless. This passenger detail component has a small amount of local state, but it's not a smart component like this one because this is providing the data. However, we pass each passenger down. We can edit a passenger. We can remove a passenger. And then once those events actually occur, we can then write some logic to handle those changes, whether it's an edit or a handle remove.